All right, so our November 2022 Science Communication webinar is a strategic plan for wildlife and timber management on WRC game lands, a constrained optimization model. Our presenter is Casey Phillips. Casey is our recovery and sustainment program forester in our lands and water access program or division. And so, Casey, again, thanks for your willingness to make the presentation today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cobb. Yeah, my name's Casey Phillips, and I am the RASP forester. My office is down at Holly Shelter. I've been a forester with the agency for about 10 years now, and I'm really glad to be here today to give y'all an update on our progress on the forest optimization project and to show you some of our preliminary results. I'll jump right in. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a quick overview of our forestry program and its goals. I'll talk about our current capacity and how we planned our forest management activities in the past. Then I'll go over what the optimization project is all about and how our strategic plan is developed. I'll show you how it actually works on the Caswell County game lands, and then I'll go over some preliminary statewide results. So let's talk about the goals of our agency forestry program. First and foremost, we want to improve and increase habitat on the acres that are under our stewardship. And I can promise you that that's always the driver behind every decision that our agency foresters are making every single day. Secondly, land and forest management is very complicated, and especially at the scale at which our agency operates. So effectively forecasting the timing of our treatments and accurately predicting our management costs and revenues are very important so that we can delegate our limited resources appropriately. It also allows us to mitigate both predicted and unpredicted obstacles with as little impact to our operations as possible. And we don't know what the future holds. So we need to have the ability to objectively evaluate alternative short and long-term strategies and the flexibility to course correct if that's necessary. So before we get into how the project can help us to achieve these goals, I'd like to talk about the current capacity of our forestry program and the strategies that we've used in the past for operational planning over the last few decades. As you're probably aware, we have about 2.5 million acres in the game lands program in North Carolina. Now, the majority of that is in the national forests, but about 500,000 acres is our agency stewardship, meaning that we control the management actions and serve in a fiduciary role when it comes to the cost and the revenues generated from the management of those acres. Now, a little over 200,000 acres of the lands in our stewardship are in managed timber stands, which means that we have the ability to harvest timber to reach our habitat goals on those acres. That in turn generates receipts that we can use to fund future management or to match other funds like Pittman Robertson. Right now we have 9 agency foresters and 3 assistant foresters who are responsible for administering those timber sales, in addition to any subsequent reforestation and mid-rotational treatments that come later. They're also responsible for the oversight of the burning program in their work areas, which totals about 30,000 acres annually. So they're busy folks. For the last several decades, foresters have planned to accomplish those tasks on an annual basis. And some of those, these are annual forestry plans, and some of you may have actually had the chance to review some of those where each forester develops a work plan for the upcoming fiscal year. Now, this process looks a little bit different in each work area and each region, but essentially it boils down to what what can I, as a forester, reasonably accomplish over the next 12 months? So there's some pretty obvious issues or potential issues with this methodology. First of all, we're making area-based decisions instead of allowing the silviculture of the forest stands we're trying to manage to drive our management actions. Secondly, it's unstandardized, centralized, meaning that everybody's doing things a little bit differently. And when you combine that with a 12-month planning horizon, there's very little ability for long-range fiscal and operational planning. So there's also smaller and out-of-the-way places that can get passed over because they're kind of on the back 40, which has both the negative impact of diminished habitat, but also loss in revenue. So in 2019, the agency partnered with the Forestry and Wildlife Departments at NC State to develop a strategic forest management plan that could lay out a schedule for our timber harvest and our financial returns over the next 50 years. That plan is driven primarily by the habitat produced from proper silviculture, and it identifies the most efficient way to apply our timber prescriptions, which allows us to make some value-added decisions through this optimization technology. The results of the 50-year plan will also facilitate planning at both tactical and operational scales, and it allows us to stabilize our cash flows. So what in the world is linear programming and constrained optimization? It's a pretty common mathematical modeling technique that can be used to maximize a user-defined objective function within a set of bounding constraints. It's a very common technique used across a range of industries to meet specific objectives by using limited resources in the most efficient manner. So in agriculture, an example might be if I have 5 fields, do I plant soybeans or corn in which ones and which years based on the projected market value of the commodities and the potential costs that it's going to take me to do either one. In manufacturing, you might make a certain number of widgets and a certain number of gadgets based on the number of man hours it takes to make them and the potential limiting resource that you have for both of them. It's also pretty much the global standard for timber management companies, Weyerhaeuser, International Paper, any of those big Rayonier, any big land management timber company is using this type of process to balance their inputs with their goals. We plan to use it to balance our limited supply of personnel and financial resources in order to maximize the habitat quality that we have on our game lands. So this on the right is kind of a conceptual model I put together, with habitat quality increasing on the y-axis and potential revenue from timber management increasing on the x-axis. You might think about it like this, there's some really high quality habitat, but we're still making some revenue off of managing that habitat through timber harvest. And then there's some pretty low quality habitat that can also generate even more revenue through timber harvest, but is pretty poor quality habitat. But there is a difference in the amount of revenue that can be made above what we would consider our sort of minimum level of quality habitat. So that's where we're trying to be, is where we're capitalizing on as much revenue as we can generate while we're meeting those habitat goals that we have for the agency. So here's what the workflow of that development of that strategic plan looks like. We take our current forest inventory, which we get by actually going out in the woods and cruising timber. Then we apply all the different possible prescriptions that our agency staff has developed to maximize our habitat condition in the first place. We incorporate those and simulate the forest conditions based on growth and yield equations. Then we can take the combination of all the different options and we put them into this optimization model, which basically picks the best ones that maximize our habitat goals within the boundaries of any constraints that we apply. And this final strategic management plan is really just our interpretation of those outputs, where we incorporate, any modifications and recommendations from field staff, and then that we can use that eventually as our actual operational plan. So, like I said, everything starts with our current forest inventory, and we had a big statewide inventory done on a contract basis in 2015. That inventory is continuously being updated. It wasn't long ago that we were using paper tally books in the woods to do our timber crews, and now everybody has a tablet. When you go out and take a plot, it's continuously uploaded to the cloud. It's stored in this cool software that we have that's a ArcGIS online based software that houses all of our inventory data. We can pull that data out and export it to multiple other platforms. We can run it through a program called T-Cruise, which merchandises it. We can put it directly into our growth and yield model, which I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. But there are about 3,500 stands, actually a few more, quite a bit more, maybe about 4,000 stands that are actually inventory. There's over 20,000 inventory plots and 140,000 trees that were physically measured that are stored in this data set. So it's a pretty significant amount of data. So now let's talk about how we articulated our timber prescriptions and then integrated those into the growth and yield model to develop that future forest inventory. And that's what eventually we're going to build the optimization model on over here in this software called Woodstock. So to begin the process of articulating those prescriptions, we went through and we identified 11 timber management regimes. So every single stand in the state was put into a management regime by the work area forester. And those 11 regimes are listed over here on the right. So what you're not going to see over there in that list is like bottomland hardwood or pocosin or grassland, because we're not doing timber management on any of those timber types. But each stand is put into one of these 11 based on that stand's ultimate trajectory. So Angola Bay has a lot of even-age loblolly pine plantation that will remain in loblolly pine plantation. So that's the regime that those stands are placed in. There are other places that are in a loblolly pine plantation now, but are scheduled for restoration to longleaf or shortleaf. Those are put into those regimes now. They have sub-regimes that indicate their current condition. So it might be a regime 2 longleaf pine stand regime, even though it's currently in a loblolly pine condition. Those regimes and sub-regimes have a unique set of prescriptions that are applied to them based on those regimes and their ultimate trajectory and what we ultimately want them to end up looking like. So how do we come up with those, right? How do we get from the left side, which is really poor condition, to the right side, which is what we're after? What is a timber prescription? Each stand has, or each timber prescription is really just a set of actions like a thinning or a final harvest that's triggered by certain stand characteristics that happen over the life of that stand. So is it age? It's thinned at a certain age, or a certain stocking or a basal area. Or a defined prescription. So that took a lot of time and meetings back and forth with all the foresters. to really articulate those. And you can't just say, well, we want it to kind of look like this, and this is what we're sort of after. In order to model these prescriptions in a growth and yield model, we have to be very, very exact in what, it has to be at this basal area, this thinning is going to happen, or at this basal area, this thinning is going to happen. There's a residual of 80 feet or 60 feet or 40 feet of basal area that's going to be left after the stand is thinned, and then there has to be certain steps after that. So we had to be very specific. So we had to articulate all of those decisions that we're sort of making subjectively now so that we could put them into a mathematical model. And those ranges are really important for lots of different reasons, not just habitat quality. We have to be able to merchandise these stands. So if we thin it way too early or way too heavy, and there's not enough residual timber left in that stand to do another thinning later, we end up losing habitat quality because we can't merchandise those stands and get the work done that we need to. So once we had all timber prescriptions figured out, written down, we put them into this software called FVS, or the Forest Vegetation Simulator. It's a web-based software package that the U.S. Forest Service actually created. It's free, which is another great thing. And it is extremely versatile, so we can grow all of our different timber regimes using this one software package. There are a lot of highly refined growth and yield models that work on loblolly pine plantations because they are of such a high monetary value, and they're really dialed in, but you can't grow a cove stand with them at all. And there's very few of those kinds of individual growth and yield. FVS combines a bunch of those different models into one. It also allows us to create custom computer programs or scripts that simulate the prescriptions that we've articulated. So we can put those directly into this software, and it grows them exactly like we want to. You can see there's a whole bunch of stands in this little graph on the right. Each time those go up and then drop, that's a thinning. And so that's what it's simulating right there. We also get a whole bunch of different outputs, and it has the ability for us to generate custom outputs for the metrics that it generates. And I'll get a little bit more into that. So we have 24 output metrics that are calculated for every stand in the model. Some of those would be like basal area or trees per acres, standing volume and removed volume, in addition to 10 more custom metrics that aren't what you would normally get out of a growth and yield model. We have 100 individual prescription scripts that go in. So every single unique prescription has to be put in there. And there are multiple prescriptions based on the ranges of those triggers, like I was talking about, for each stand, which gives us multiple options for management. The growth and yield model gives us 5-year periodic outputs. There's 10 periods, so it's a 50-year model. And there's a yield table that's generated for each stand in each of those periods. So there's several thousand unique, what we call yield streams, and I'll get into that just a little bit more, that we end up with after this growth and yield process. And that is what we build the Woodstock model on. This is an example, is a very simplified example, but this is an example of what a yield stream might look like. So you can see there at age 20, you have the basal area for that stand, you have the habitat index for that stand, stand in pulpwood, stand in saw timber, removed pulpwood, and removed saw timber. So when a thinning is applied to that stand per the prescription, 21 tons of pulpwood per acre are harvested, and then it continues to grow. And you can see down at age 45, there would be 25 tons of saw timber available per acre in that stand. These little computer generated, stand pictures are kind of neat. They don't really do anything, but they demonstrate kind of what a stand may or may not look like after a treatment's applied to it. This habitat variable is extremely important, and that is really the next big thing that we're about to get into, and that is what we have to have in these yield tables in order to perform a constrained optimization model if we want habitat to be part of it. So this is the big part of the project that we're going to get into right now. Integrating habitat into these constrained optimization models via the yield tables. How do we do this? So our objective is to quantify the potential for a stand to provide habitat to a certain species or group of species based on the structure and composition of that stand at a given time. We assume that all the other elements of habitat are present. Meaning if gopher frogs are one of our focal species, that we assume that there are gopher frog ponds in that stand, right? And we want to estimate the potential for that stand to provide habitat should those other non-timber and structural components be there already. It needs to be functional at a forest stand scale, and it has to be able to be derived from our traditional forest inventory metrics. So we have to be able to go out there and cruise a stand and then calculate some metrics that give us the potential, the habitat potential for that stand. We can't just, there's a lot of habitat components that we don't get in a traditional timber inventory. Maybe species, native understory species are usually not measured in a traditional timber inventory. So we don't need to be trying to use those to estimate that habitat potential. And it needs to be universal across all of the timber regimes so that we can estimate that stand's potential, whether it's in a longleaf pine stand or an oak hickory stand. The three steps that we have to take to accomplish this are: first, we have to identify what the species we're after. So what are the focal wildlife species? Then we have to relate their preferences in habitat to the structure and composition of the stands that we're after. And then we have to actually quantify that relationship on a per acre basis so we can put it back into those yield tables. And it's important to remember, we're not trying to predict the occurrence of or the number of animals that are in a stand. All we're trying to do is weigh the potential of a stand at a given time to provide habitat as a result of those timber treatments that we're applying. So what makes a good focal species? Is it imperiled? Habitat is species specific. So you can't just say we want to make good habitat, right? You have to have specific species. And so to pick out which of those species that we want to use, these are the questions that we took to our agency foresters. Is it imperiled? Is it ecologically or socially important? Game species, right? Threatened and endangered. Are we actually trying to manage stands for it? And if we are they sensitive to those management actions, right? If we have a stand that has too much mid-story and we go in there and do a thinning, will that species respond to it, or will it persist just like it was had we not done anything? Can we quantify its preferences for the structure and composition? Do we know what it prefers? And like I said before, can we use those structure and composition metrics that we get from a timber cruise to estimate, whether it's responded? So we approach this using this thing called a modified Delphi approach, which that refers to the Oracle at Delphi back in Greek mythology. But we basically got as many smart people together as we could figure out, as we could find, and we used them to we asked their opinion, and we did it several times in order to reach this consensus. We started with our foresters, and we went out and we expanded that to a bunch of agency staff and management and diversity. And we ended up with 11 focal species, and we grouped a lot of those into 4 different species guilds. So, the longleaf pine associates, we have Bachman sparrows, gopher frogs, pine snakes, RCWs, and fox squirrels. Each of these focal guilds, every game land in the state has a focal guild assigned to it. That is the focal guild for that game lands, and I'll get into why that's important in a few minutes. But the open forest associates, think about Butner and Jordan. This is red-headed woodpeckers, wild turkey, deer, timber rattlesnakes, black bear. Ruffed grouse is its own unique individual guild. It's obviously it's elevationally limited, so we don't really need to try to manage for ruffed grouse at Holly Shelter. But it is where the game lands where it is not elevationally limited. Ruffed grouse is the primary focal species for our management. And then the shrubland associates are, you might think of them as early successional or young forest species. We measure that habitat guild on every single game land. That's quail, rabbits, indigo buntings, prairie warblers. So this is kind of what we're trying to qualify, right? We know that the poor condition on the left there is not what we're after, and we're trying to get as close to best as possible. But the middle image that has it's got some understory. There's some sunlight getting on the ground, so we're trying to weigh good, poor, and best conditions. We all have that mental image of kind of what is good habitat, but applying that to thousands of stands based on future conditions is really, really difficult, and that's why we have to use these models. And we need these metrics with reported values in the literature to support the habitat potential and the quality of habitat that we assign to each of those stands. So these are the 10 forest condition and composition metrics that we're going to take and we're going to use to assess that. To pick through all of those different options, there was a couple of requirements. We had to be able to find either explicit or implicit ranges that are reported in the literature. We had to be able to go out and do a timber cruise and derive those metrics from them. And we needed to be able to predict what they're going to do in the future using our growth and yield model in FVS. Some of the metrics or some things that we want to know, like understory condition, we can't really we don't have a specific metric that we can calculate, but we can use a surrogate for. So fire return interval, we know that if we have a normal response to a 3-year fire return interval, that our understory condition is going to be the best it can be. So that's how we can use a surrogate to model things that we can't necessarily get at through our inventory. I'm going to go through each of these guilds, and the matrix is listed here with the best, good, and poor condition for each of those structural and composition metrics. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but these are sort of the gists of the desired conditions that we're after. So for the Longleaf Pine Associates Guild, We want that sunlight reaching the ground, and that's, that encourages that herbaceous understory. That's a common theme through all of these. We want a minimal mid-story. We've got red cockaded woodpeckers trying to forage. So if we have much mid-story, that's going to begin to exclude them. Bare mineral soil and acorn production are two more things that, that picks up the fox squirrels and the pine snakes and the gopher frogs. Open forest associates, that's the deer and the turkeys. We want more of a woodland condition in this guild. So we still want that sunlight reaching the ground and the bare mineral soil. There is some mid-story and shrub layer that's tolerable though, and we're still after that hard mass production. The Shrubland Associates Guild, this, like I said, you might think of that as a young forest or an early successional. So age is actually important to this group. We want very little woody cover and the lowest basal areas possible. And then for grouse, again, we have an age class that we're really after. Timber regime, those oak, hardwood and northern hardwood stands are really important, but we also want some mass producing oaks in that stand. That's also really important. So we have to assign some sort of numerical values to these qualifications in order to use them in that mathematical programming model. How we're going to do that. So this is how we actually use these matrices. I picked a yield table from a stand. It's a 90-year-old pine oak stand at Butner, and it has 60 feet of basal area with 55% canopy cover. It has about 64% of the basal area is oak that's over 10 inches, meaning they're mature oaks. It has little mid-story, and we're burning it on a 3-year rotation. So if we run through each of those metrics, we get it's in the best condition for everything but canopy cover, and it's in the good condition for that. We take the average of those metrics and we get a 0.9 habitat score for the open forest species in that stand in that period. And so that's what brings us back to our yield tables. So we now have our habitat scores along with our habitat values and our harvest volumes in one place in these yield tables, and we have it for every period, for every acre. This is on a per acre basis. So each stand, if it's a 100-acre stand at this condition, we can multiply that out and figure out what the total stand values for all of these are. So we're back to the workflow here. We're at the part where we actually take all of the potential options and we evaluate them against one another. So this is kind of what that would look like. If we have prescription A, where we thin this current condition, at maybe at a certain age, to a certain residual, this is the result. And if we have a prescription that thins it maybe a little bit later, a little bit heavier, the bottom is the resulting condition. And we have the actual values of the timber harvested per acre and the habitat conditions that result from each of those prescriptions. So historically, this is kind of the decisions that our foresters are making somewhat subjectively for every stand that they're trying to put into those annual forest management plans. And you can see how at 3,500 stands, over the next 50 years. That would be extremely hard for us to make without using some kind of mathematical model. So this is where we get into the Woodstock model. We take an objective. The Woodstock model has an objective function, and that is to maximize the sum of all of those habitat scores. So for each of the focal species in every stand, we take that score plus the shrubland score for that stand, and we add it up in every single period across the entire model. That's what we're actually trying to maximize with the decisions that the model's making. We have two constraints on the model. We have an even flow constraint of 30% on the cash flow, and that stabilizes our timber revenues, and it stabilizes the amount of acres that are being treated over the course of the model, so that we don't do everything all at once up front, which is really logistically infeasible, but it's also hard to plan for if everything we do happens right away and then our revenues drop to nothing for the next 30 years. We have a non-declining standing volume constraint that ensures that we don't over harvest up front or ever, and we have a sustainable harvest in perpetuity. The other thing the Woodstock model calculates is about 500 different accounting variables that allows us to look at things like age structure, or are we meeting our longleaf restoration or shortleaf restoration objective, who's doing what, or who's having to do what planned in different regions, all the different regions, the acres that are thinned and the final harvested are all calculated, the acres that we have to turn around and reforest. That generates, that allows us to calculate our net revenues and do these cash flow analysis. And the big thing is that we're also accounting for the habitat conditions. So we know how many acres are offering the best condition or the best potential, good potential or marginal potential for habitat on each of our game lands across the state in every period. So here is what this looks like. And the plan that the current model that we have, this is what it would actually look like on Caswell. This is a map of the habitat condition for the open forest associates, so the deer and turkeys, for all the stands on Caswell Game Land in 2022. You can see that most of this map is either green or gray, light green or gray, indicating that those stands are either in the marginal or the good condition. So there's obviously a little bit of room for improvement here. The optimization model prescribes about 12,000 acres of timber harvest, most of which are thinnings over the next 17 years on Caswell. If all of those harvests are completed at the time that the model schedules, this is what our habitat conditions will look like in 2040. So those prescriptions have moved the open forest habitat condition from about 5% of the acreage in best condition to 60% in the best condition in less than 20 years. So that's about a 52% increase in the amount of acres in the good and best condition as a result of treating those 12,000 acres in that time frame. So what does the model prescribe in terms of harvest statewide? So over that same time frame we just looked at for Caswell, the model schedules over 92,000 acres of timber harvest, which is significantly more than we've been harvesting on average over the last 10 years. This large influx in harvest is really due to a substantial backlog of stands that are actually overdue to be harvested for various reasons. And it's important to note here that we actually constrain the model with that 30% spreads that harvest across the backlog out more evenly. Otherwise, the model would try to harvest all of those that are backlogged in that first 5 years, which is really just logistically infeasible. But handling that backlog even over 20 years immediately brings us up and above our habitat targets across the state. So this graph represents the total habitat scores, which is what we're trying to maximize statewide. And that green line represents if every habitat score was 0.5 for every stand in the state or in the good condition, which is about a 25% increase in the habitat condition across the board. And it's a direct result of that 92,000 acres being harvested in those first 3 periods. And a subsequent dip in the middle is a result of those backlog acres that we harvested early, moving into, a submerchantable condition or pre-commercial stands across the landscape. But once those reach an age where they can be thinned again, that habitat score goes back up significantly and continues to rise if we were to run the model out further. So all of that habitat increase is not free, and timber harvest isn't the only thing required to meet those prescriptions that are scheduled in the model. Anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 acres have to be planted every year. That involves site preparation, tree planting contracts. We don't just go out there, plant the trees, and walk away. We almost always have to apply mid-rotational treatments after we plant in order to control that competition and to ensure the establishment of the stand. So once we do establish those stands, there's more timber cruising, there's more harvest scheduling and stuff like that has to be done. All in all, that's about 150% increase in the workload over what we're doing now for just our silvicultural practices. We're currently evaluating additional logistical constraints to put into the model based on available personnel in our forestry program to further sort of refine the strategic plan, and it'll help us identify where we can best utilize any increases in capacity. So I want to wrap up by taking another look at our forestry program's goals and how the optimization project is helping us to advance them. First and foremost, always habitat, and the treatments prescribed by the model have an immediate and significant improvement in habitat across the state, which continues over time. Secondly, we want to run an efficient forestry program, and we want to have the ability to reliably predict our operational needs and our financial return. And the model has pretty clearly identified fluctuations in our upcoming workflow, but also demonstrated that the revenues are there to support the resources we'll need to complete that in a sustainable way. And finally, as long as we have an accurate forest inventory, we can use these optimization tools to evaluate or reevaluate alternative management strategies over both short and long-term horizons. So to close, I'd just like to thank these folks on the development team, as well as all of the agency staff. I know a lot of you are on this call right now who've committed time and resources to the project. There's really only 1 or 2 other agencies in the country who are really utilizing this type of technology, and I think we're really moving our program to the next level. And those benefits hopefully will be realized by the constituency and the resources that we manage. So with that, I think we still have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, we certainly do, Casey, and thanks again. What a great presentation. A really important project for a lot of aspects of our agency. And I'll just remind everybody, if you have a question, please put that in the chat. And so, Casey, I'll start out with the first one. And the question is, how do these growth and yield models incorporate the influence of factors such as precipitation, fires, both wild and prescribed, non-target species competition, soil type, slope, disease, insect pest? Also, are there enough meals near the game lands that allow the harvest to be realized and obtain the estimated revenue? So really 2 questions embedded in there, Casey.
Okay, yeah. So the first part of that question is they don't. We make assumptions, and in order, like I said, this stuff gets really, really complicated, really quickly. The more variables that we introduce into that, and we're the growth and yield models. What we're really after with those outputs is the structure, forest structure, and composition. And I know, the list of things that were in there some of them could influence that. FVS has some potential to incorporate some of those, but like I said, that it does get very complicated when we start trying to. The more variables we include, it gets pretty complicated. So, our goal is to really just get that structure and vegetative species composition in there, and we feel like there's they're pretty good. The models are pretty good without incorporating those. Wildfire risk and stuff like that. Again, that's tough to incorporate. But the nice thing about this is that we're setting ourselves up where we have the ability. We can rerun this model anytime we want to, right? So, like I said in that last slide, as long as we have an accurate forest inventory, we can update everything. So if we have a bark beetle infestation and we lose some area, we update that forest inventory. We can put that all right back into the model, and use those habitat matrices to evaluate the current conditions, and then we grow it from there. And it's always a best guess when we're talking about growth and yield models. And the second part of that question, that's the mill capacity. Obviously, in the eastern part of the state and the Piedmont, that's really not an issue. That's something that we're working really to identify in the western part of the state, that that capacity may or may not be there for some game lands, and obviously it's very area specific, but that's up to the local work area forester to try and identify the markets that they have available. And as we keep moving forward with this optimization modeling process, we'll be able to incorporate more of that specifically directly into the model.
All right, Casey. Next question is, does the increase in building in the southeast put pressure on the timber management function to sell prior to optimum financial and operational conditions?
No, I think is the short answer to that. So the Woodstock, the optimization model has all it's trying to do is increase the objective function. The only variables in the objective function are the habitat scores of each stand. So if it's trying to increase that right now, no. I guess if timber cash flow is in there in a way, and if timber prices really went up, revenues would go up, but that should not drive the model. And we have some methods, I guess, that we're working on right now that kind of evaluate cash flow and habitat simultaneously, and we can compare the sensitivity of habitat as revenues, I guess, increase as well. So we can weigh that in, but it would never drive the model to harvest in a way that was not the most beneficial to the habitats. To increase in those habitat scores, I guess, would be the answer to that.
Okay. So in determining how to evaluate the quality of the habitat are aquatic resources incorporated in that in any way? In other words, the impact of whatever the silvicultural treatments are going to be on aquatic resources, wetlands, that type of thing. And I would think that would be especially important in the mountains.
Yeah, they are indirectly through the way that our timber stands are laid out to basically the SMZs, the streamside management zones that were really, that's what we use, which is, and a streamside management zone is sort of a buffer that's what we use to protect that water quality. Those are really incorporated into our stand boundaries. So that's minimized. And also, these treatments are scheduled through the model, but it's up to the work area foresters are the ones that are actually going to go out on the ground and mark those stands, and they're going to be the ones that are, taking any additional steps that would be those are really local factors that I think we're talking about. So those would be handled on the ground by the work area foresters that are actually marking those timber sales, and they would be the ones that are kind of making sure those best management practices are being implemented. It's too fine of a scale for this model to be impacted.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Well, hold on a minute. Maybe not. Let's see here, Casey. Do loblolly pine stands always remain loblolly over the course of long-term management? Or is there the flexibility to do upland hardwood restoration management on sites where promoting the management of mature hardwood stands may be desirable in the long term?
So that would go back. I think I understand the question, but that would go back to the assignment of the regime. And so if there were a loblolly pine stand that were let's say it was at Caswell, and there was a pine plantation that would do really well to, maybe it was a mixed stand, even maybe it had some hardwood components. The forester there would evaluate its potential for restoration and then assign it to an oak hickory or a pine oak management regime. And even though that stand would currently be in a loblolly pine condition, the prescriptions that the model would then have the ability to assign to that stand would move it towards the ultimate trajectory of a restored pine oak or oak hickory stand. And I think that's what the question was after.
Yeah, a little further, the question's based on the loss of mature upland hardwood habitats, particularly on private lands in the coastal regions and in the Piedmont. And you've already gotten that answers my question perfectly, thanks to all our wildlife foresters. So good job. Perfect answer. All right, I think we're out of time. I will encourage anybody that has any additional questions to get in touch directly with Casey. I want to thank you again, Casey, for your willingness to give this presentation, and for everybody who joined in. I hope everybody has a good rest of your day. And with that, we're gonna close it out.
Thank you very much.